I'm Tim Monroe, and this is what I really want to talk about. There's something fascinating about every single one of us. Everybody has a passion and a story to tell, something that lights them up. Every week I sit down with interesting people and we talk about the things that really matter to them and to all of us. It might be funny, it might be weighty, it might be weird. It's what I really want to talk about. I'm talking today with Jeffrey Sanderson. He is a native of Toronto and now a painter based in Chicago, where he has been engaged in an intuitive and exploratory home studio practice steadily for over 20 years. His day job is a financial aid counselor at Columbia College in Chicago. Jeffrey studied painting at the Lamar Dodd School of Art at the University of Georgia and graduated with his BFA in 1999. His non-objective oil painting is based on incisive mark making and their placement as an end in itself. As he says, my work depends upon and celebrates the remarkable sensitivity and uncanny memory that humans possess. Welcome, Jeffrey. What do you really want to talk about today?
Thanks, Tim. I really want to talk about painting. I have painting at the center of my life, and I see painting as connected to all sorts of other interesting things that I care about. And I've been doing it a long time, and it sort of fell into my lap in this funny way we'll probably talk about. And that's what I really want to talk about today.
Excellent. So this is 2020, my 21st episode. I've not talked to a painter yet. I've talked to some other artists. So this is going to be a lot of fun for me. So let me do this. As I always do, let's start at the beginning. Can you remember when you first understood, maybe you were a kid, maybe you were a young man, first understood or felt that painting or just plain creativity were going to be an important part of your life?
It's funny to look back on life with this question in mind, because I would say that it's very clear to me, the adult sitting here, how this stuff kind of bubbled up in my life. But at the time, I wouldn't have seen it that way. So I think, like all little kids, I loved making art, and maybe not all little kids, but almost all little kids
Yeah.
love it. So at a 4, 5, or 6-year-old level, I was banging. Um, at some point, I got interested in various models, ships, and I had a train set, things like that. And for me, the appeal of, let's say, building a model or working on my train set wasn't really how amazing the trains were going to be. I think train people often who have a train set, they really want to have the intricate train set, and the models come painted. And for me, it was sort of like immediately I want to improve the painting and I want
Yeah.
to add some rust, decal, some customization, and the buildings need to look real and lichen on the ground. And I was very much connected to that aspect of models rather than necessarily some of the other things. A lot of other people love the building aspect. I built them,
Mhm.
but I didn't love the building aspect.
Yeah. You're 4, 5, 6. You're a young kid. You realize art's fun for you. You like to do art. You like models. At what point, and this is probably much later, did you sort of understand, or was there a point when you realized and decided that no matter what else was on in your life, that you were going to be an artist, you were going to be a painter?
Well, I gave up on making art in my early teenage years, like so many kids sort of put it away.
Mhm.
And when I was a college student, my first year of college, I was young. I was 17 until partway through college, till December of my freshman year. And I really didn't know what to study. And so I was in the wrong program. I was a business major for a brief moment in my life. And I know why I made that choice. I don't feel pressured or anything, but it wasn't really working. And um, art seemed like something that was pulling me for some funny reason. I hadn't been doing it, but I cared about it. And there was a museum on campus and a whole building for
Mhm.
World of the Arts, and I was able to be in there a bit and really recognize those are my people. I had an advisor really tell me, like, so why aren't you studying art then? These are your
Mhm.
well, this is your favorite place on campus. Like, this is a clue for you, that you might want to listen. If you're not happy with what you're doing, you're not going to be successful in business if you don't even like business school. That's not going to work out for you. Uh, and so I changed my focus and my major, and I would have been that was the mid '90s. So I would have been a sophomore.
So you changed from business to art your sophomore year. And had you been dabbling? Have you been painting just on your own?
So I remember a choice we were given in art school to work with acrylic or oil. They said you'll be buying a lot of paint and you'll want to make this decision. So I had been painting with enamel mostly, and art materials weren't, around. So no, as the answer to your question.
Yeah.
I can't believe when I look back again, it's such a there's an age where you make these massive decisions that just sort of happen, and I made this massive decision and it didn't seem massive at the time.
Right. Yeah. So here you are. So talk a little bit about, and I want to point out, if people want to, while they're listening to this, if they want to look at some of your work, where should they go?
Well, I have a website with a lot of older work on it, and I have an Instagram with a lot of newer work.
Okay.
So I think both of those places are good. My website is jeffreysanderson.com, and my Instagram handle is at Jeffrey Sanderson. So they're
Okay.
kind of.
So talk about your work today. Describe for listeners, what is your painting like? Describe it for us?
Yeah. Well, I care a lot about color, and I think my paintings tend to have a good amount of color in them. They're not generally monochromes. My paintings are made of oil. I work big and small. For me, small is sort of a foot and a half or so by a foot and a half or so.
Hmm.
I don't generally work much bigger than 6 feet. I have in the past, and it's actually a bit of a pain to get things through the door and all of that. So I work usually on three or four different things at a time, and they tend to be um, kind of blobby and abstract and non-representational. Um, I think that my paintings are often juxtaposed with thick and thin, or big areas and small ones, or linear and blobbier, and sort of those contrasts. I
Hmm.
also think about color contrasts, warm and cool, things like that. Um, and so my paintings kind of reflect those interests.
So talk about how um, I've looked at your art online, and it's amazing. And there's a certain sort of style to it, which I think is very strong, kind of identifies you as an artist. But how did you get there? Like, what was your evolution? I mean, did you start in this sort of abstract way, or was it a process that you got there?
Definitely a process. Thanks for
Yeah.
asking. Interesting question. I remember in college, the critiques that you would prepare for were they were intimidating. You never knew quite
Hmm.
what happened. There were reactions you were going to get from students. There was a lot of sitting and listening in the beginning of a critique where you weren't really able to even respond, where you're just listening to a dialogue about your work. And I was making representational, I'd make figure paintings or scenes and landscape and things like that that were, nothing I'm very interested in now, to be super frank. I don't know if I have any of those paintings anymore, and I don't care about them. But I remember I made a painting and I had worked really hard on it, and it had this landscape quality to it. It was a landscape, and it had a figure in it, and I had worked really hard. And I was going to be talking about all this stuff in the critique. And then none of that happened. We talked some drips that were in the painting. We talked about like being responsible for every square inch of this piece. You don't get to say in the critique, well, that part's not done yet, or any. That sounds like a horrible excuse. And my teacher, Judy McWillie, pointed out a roof line that had that was fading into the background, or sort of fading into the mist, if you will, and these roofs. She said, "This is my favorite part of the painting, and I wish that you could just make a painting that's only this."
Hmm.
Struck something for me, sort of like, well, that's a great jumping off point. I can do that, and I actually am curious to do that. And
Hmm.
I made a painting that started off with that in mind, but turned out to be an abstract painting. And it was kind of angular and flat and really different than anything I'd done before. And it was a jumping off moment to say, we're talking all about paint. We're not the painting that's the bowl of apples. It's not apples. It's paint. It's paint.
Yeah.
And I love that stuff. Like I knew that it was in my bones at that point. Making these camouflage decisions on a bomber, or you know what I'm saying? Like I'd always
Yeah.
cared about the paint part of it, and that was my jumping off point into really abandoning representational painting.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is when you think about starting a painting now, when you think of approaching a canvas, say, you're not thinking, uh, well, what are you thinking? So I have this question. I'm not sure I want to ask it, but I think I will now. So, how or why do you start a painting? Like, where does where does that come from? What's because it sounds like you're not thinking of, oh, I'm going to represent a landscape or something like that, but you're more thinking something very different. Talk about that.
Something very different. Yeah. I think I want to begin by saying that there's this special space, this rectangle often, or this space, this shape, where where a painter can make the rules and make up a language that's their own and sort of engage in the poetry of that. And that space is this big blank. It's often white, big rectangle. And for me, it's a beginning is it's actually happening not there, but it happens on the palette. And so mixing color, caring about. Right now, I've used almost an entire tube of this particular green that's very blue, and what I like about it is that you can take it into you can add some yellow, and I have a bunch of different yellows, so you can add one of your yellows and get it into this just um, spot, and when engaging in that play on the palette, at some point, it's time to one of those mixed colors becomes engaged enough that it needs to be in the painting. And so the act of putting it into the painting involves a brush or a palette knife or anything like that. And the second one begins, you get a little notion. It's almost like a plan. I'm gonna put this green in the middle of the painting. Let's see how that goes. Or I'm gonna put it on the edge or whatever. You need a little bit of a jumping off point.
Yeah.
As soon as one jumps off, all the plans evaporate, and you're now confronted with the moment of creation, the moment of
Hmm.
um, and my reaction to that initial mark making is often negative. It's often like, well, now I've screwed up, or now I don't want where it is, which is an opportunity to move it or to, think in an oppositional way, sort of like, well, let's redden it up then, or let's neutralize it, or let's wipe it off, or whatever reactions. And now you've really started. At that point, you've started.
So, what you're describing to me is, which is amazing, this idea that so you're not starting with a sense of an ending. You're not starting with a sense of, when I'm done, I have a sense of what this is going to look like. Every step follows from the one before it. It's like you and I were talking about this prior to this conversation, about like improvisational music, right? Like, so you put on a mark or you play a note, and then the next note just follows naturally from that, whatever it is. And maybe it works well, maybe it doesn't, or maybe in your mind you're like, oh, that's good, I'm going to keep doing that, or oh, I didn't like that, I'm going to change it. But whatever it is, it stays there on the canvas, right? I mean, in some sense.
Some sense. Even if you wipe it off, there's often a little bit of cloudiness unless you really wipe it off carefully. Uh, anyway, technical, but basically, yes, there's going to be a residue, even a decisional kind of residue where, like, well, I know I don't want it to be green. I already tried that. That still is there.
Yeah. So, and as you move through, you are just in a sense, kind of following yourself, and seeing how things go, and then just making step by step based on, sort of, I made a mark. What feels like the next right mark? Not that I've already decided, but in that moment, you decide just very much in the moment, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's correct. There are times when I'll squeeze paint directly from the tube onto the canvas and then move it around, just because there seems to be a bit of a rush, like um, to get to keep going or to stay with a feeling or to react in a particular way. But yeah, it's definitely reactions, and I guess I'm full of ideas about paint and painting and other people's paintings and other people's marks and marks that have moved me in some way, and getting some of that to be something I'm reflecting on.
And what's that feeling like when you're doing that? Um, does it feel sort of, um, technical, or are you are you moved sort of in an emotional way as you make these marks?
There are a lot of different ways that it can feel. There is a technical aspect, but I'm experienced, and so I don't need to think about the technical as much. There's a rule about you want your fat paint over your lean paint, so fat over
Mm-hmm.
lean, and that implies that there's the oilier paint goes on later. It'll crack if you don't do it that way. Blah blah blah. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, um, I love that that part of it can kind of drive the overall completing of the painting. At some point, your paint is as fat as it's going to be, and I hope you're getting close to being done because it's going to be a bit of a pain to keep going. Um, and so it feels, gosh, it feels participatory. I'm participating in the life of this new thing. Um, but it is also a little technical. I guess pigments are opaque or transparent or warm or cool or have a lot of tinting strength. A little bit goes a long way, or the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's nice when something technical can occupy your conscious mind. I find in answering this question, I realize there's probably a bit of a split where the conscious mind is very much focused on something technical so that there's this other part that is going to actually do the painting. And that unconscious part of me is free to act because I've focused my conscious mind away.
And you've done it so many times that you know you sort of have a sense of what works and what doesn't.
Yes, I have a sense. What I just popped into my head was the idea of sometimes you get an idea and you better mix up a lot of paint for this idea because you really need to get somewhere with this painting or some other crap that gets in your head. Um, and so I find I sometimes mix up a pretty big puddle of something only to use just a little hair or vice versa. I've mixed up a little of something and then I really wish I'd made more, so I got to make more now and
Mm-hmm.
there's a pain and blah blah blah. So um, it there are a lot of unknowns that happen in the moment um, to drive this.
So as you're thinking about as you're standing in front of a canvas and you're working, you're making your marks and you're sort of following yourself essentially. And at what point, how do you know it's done? Like when do you get to that point where you're like, oh, this is it, I'm finished?
Yeah, I have been thinking about that for over 20 years, but um, other painters that I care about reflect on that. It's probably the big question, right? Um, I remember something my partner Piper said where she was talking about not being able to tell what had happened earlier and what had happened later in the process of making the painting.
Mm.
That's a bit of a moment where you're at a point where it's not about being complex, but it happens to be complex enough that you can't tell what's happened first and what's happened last. That's a clue.
Mm.
Um, Talking about the paint as we were a minute ago, the physical paint, the chemistry, if you will. There's there's a sense that it's the paint is helping you to get to the end, and it's the medium. It would demand a whole bunch of additives and crap, and it just to keep going versus to find an end. Um, I think it was Gustin talked about the idea that it's all just one painting, and so that it's impossible to really know when they're done, and so you just sort of have to accept that, and you stop at some point.
Yeah. So I want to pause a little bit here and sort of dive more into your development as an artist. And so, how who are your influences? What are there artists that you've taken in and either said, "I really like that painting," or "I want to sort of not necessarily imitate, but kind of be like that," or what are those influences for you?
Gosh, one thing that strikes me is that in art school in the 90s, the things we focused on, we sort of did an overview, you might say, of the world of art, the
Hmm.
global art.
Hmm.
Then we spent a lot of time in the West. We spent a lot of time in France. We spent a lot of time in Italy, that
Hmm.
sort of. And and some of my first loves are still with me, the Matisses and sort of people like that, the Cezanne. I love Cezanne so much, and painters like that. Uh, it's funny to grow up a bit and enlarge one's perspective and realize, let's say, um, I loved Kandinsky back in the day, but Kandinsky's wife is a much more interesting painter to me now. Um, Milton Avery is an amazing painter, but Milton Avery's wife is also a really wonderful artist, and so on. So, expanding one's mind a little into to really include work from all over the world and work with very different ways of approaching visual representation, and so I love a bunch of that stuff, art school art, if you will. Um, if I were forced to name, or if you said you've got the money to buy one piece by whomever you would like, I'd buy Augustine. I love
Okay.
Philip Guston.
Yeah.
That's the short answer is Philip Guston.
And I think if people looked at your paintings and looked at his, they would see some connective tissue.
I hope that's a huge compliment. I hope
Yeah.
that way that Guston approached the paint. Guston had phases, and I think the thing that unifies all of that is this again love of paint and the mystery of paint and um, the dwelling in the physicality of it.
Yeah. So, how does this, and this is a question I've asked a lot of my guests because, and this podcast, it's just people have a passion that manifests itself in different ways in their life. And um, most of the people I've talked to, the passion that they're talking about is not the way they make a living. Um, and so they have to find, but they're very committed to it. They're committed. It takes time, it takes thought, it takes energy, it takes emotion. So how do you integrate that into your life? Because I know, you have a family, you have a full-time job, but painting seems like, I don't know if it's at your core, but it's certainly something that's very important to you. So how do you integrate that into the rest of your life?
I hear you. I think the first thing that strikes me is painting happens in the morning before work, or happens on lunch break if I'm working from home, or
Mm-hmm.
happens in the evening right after dinner. I haven't even done the dishes yet, or stay up late sometimes. Or this morning, it's a weekend, and so I was able to spend some time working on something today, and so it fits in because partly because it's possible to spend 10 minutes doing something. It's possible to spend an hour doing something. It's possible to clean some brushes for 2 minutes. And actually, you didn't do any painting, but that was preparation for future endeavors. And so it fits in that way. Um, I've had a job at an art, I've worked at two different art schools over my career. And I moved to Chicago in early 2000 and got a job at an art school, and then met your brother and
Mm-hmm.
got a different art school. I took a couple of years away from that to just pursue my art, and it went okay, but there's a stability, there's a reality that it wasn't stable. And randomly you sell a painting, and then it's sort of like money, but how long does that money have to last? And I really embrace, uh, maybe in a perfect world it wouldn't be this way, but we don't live in a perfect world. So I do really embrace the balancing act of working and being a parent, and socializing and going to shows and things, music shows in particular, and also being a painter. It does fit in.
Yeah. So it sort of begs the question, what's the commercial side of this like for you? Um, I mean, I can just tell from talking to you that you paint because you kind of have to paint. It's like a passion. But what's the commercial side of that like for you?
When I first moved to Chicago to start painting, I didn't have hardly any knowledge of the city or connections here. I didn't know anyone. Um, I set up a studio in a really great one bedroom in Edgewater. Pretty quickly met my now wife, but didn't really pursue anything commercial. I was just making paintings and putting them in a stack in my studio. They
Mm-hmm.
were in more room. I had a show at a library in the early 2000s. I had a show in Oak Park at a bookstore, a couple of paintings. Um, but commercially, for 15 years or something, I did almost nothing. I worked with a gallery once that in Andersonville. I wouldn't want to name the name, but it was a really bad experience, and it soured on that. Not just that, but the commercial piece of it was very much a sideline until the last few years, to be honest about it. In 2021, as the pandemic was abating in some ways, I had an open studio and I met. Uh, Anyway, the long story short is I met some people, including a gallerist named Gosha Korsakowski, um, and she runs a gallery called Alma in Chicago and Bridgeport, and she was really interested in my work. And so I've been selling pretty steadily now for since 2021 through Alma, and it's great in some ways. Let's be super clear before I beef at all. It Gosha's great. It's a really what I feel very lucky. She knows a lot of cool people that care about art, and I'm very lucky, and I am. But I will say it's hard to uh, s- say what I'm up to in a way that resonates easily. These aren't really landscapes, but they might have landscape qualities. These aren't
Mhm.
really still life. They sometimes look like it a little.
Mhm.
Uh, Putting a little bow on what I'm up to so that it can be communicated about is
Yeah.
not easy. Um, I think that there's I don't I'm sorry that this has popped into my head. I lost my dad a couple of months ago, and
Mhm.
I don't want my son to inherit my storage space with hundreds of paintings in it. He probably will, but not because I deliberately said, "I'll just fill a storage space up and it's someone else's problem." Um, and I think about music. Well, the relationship one has with a viewer, there's something really sacred to that. Someone's giving you their time; they'll never get back to invest in looking at your work, and hopefully they get something out of it. And so the commercial piece is sometimes a distraction to that,
Yeah.
a part of that.
Hmm. And I think your work is the sort of work that you are sort of saying you can't, there's no slogan, like Jeffrey Sanderson is a landscape artist, or Jeffrey Sanderson is a still life artist or a portraitist. Your work is abstract. And I think it's the kind of work that evokes a reaction and emotion in people, or it doesn't, right? And so that's very hard to it's hard to sort of categorize and attract like a big audience. But I think when they see your work, it's probably there's a category of people who are going to sort of really react positively to what you do.
Thank you. I hope so. I feel like what I react to in paintings that I like doubles over time. It's sort of the time spent getting comfortable. I think of the museum. I go to the Art Institute a lot, and there's a particular Matisse painting that's huge, and I love spending time because I've spent all this time with it before. That it's like that investment is now paying off in a way that I can be rewarded uh, subsequently. And um, I hope that anyone who were making this commitment to buy a painting would get something out of it differently that in a year or in 10 years than they would have
Yeah.
in the first 10 minutes.
Right, right. It's interesting because this podcast that I've been doing for a while now, it's in a sense improvisational in a way, because I don't most podcasts are about one thing. There's a podcast about you name it, your hobby, knitting, music, books, writing, etc. But my podcast is about everything. So it's whatever a interesting person wants to talk about. And so it's hard, like you're saying, it's equally hard to put a slogan on it and say, this is what this podcast is about. And so if you're interested in that, come listen. It's really if people interested in just general conversation and interesting people and what's going on in the world. And so I totally get that. So let's dive into some, we've had some deep conversations, and I've taken some notes here, and I want to sort of maybe draw you out a little bit to talk a little bit in a sort of more textured way about art and your work. So I wrote down some quotes that I just want to throw at you. Um, you sent me a quotation from Richard Diebenkorn, an artist who I think is probably an influence of yours, and he wrote this: "Don't discover a subject of any kind, quote unquote." Um, Seems like advice for an artist. So what does that mean to you?
Late in Diebenkorn's life, he wrote notes to himself on beginning a painting, and that's one of the notes. Um, and I think it's actually maybe the most mysterious to me of those notes. I
Mhm.
think I have them memorized. I certainly have the bulk of them memorized. Um, when I think about that particular uh, bit of advice, it makes me I'm sorry, it makes me think about greed, about sort of like wanting about approaching something with too much desire, with
Mm.
too don't discover a subject because you're so hungry to discover it. Don't Diebenkorn went back and forth in his life between representation and abstraction. He made so many beautiful drawings and paintings of his wife and of places he's lived, but also these lush abstractions. Uh, and so I think that Diebenkorn for himself was talking about uh, letting those different modes find you, not you finding them, if that's a way to summarize what I think about that quote.
And how would you connect that to your own work?
Um, I think of these funny moments. There's a painting I made in the early 2020s. I remember struggling enough with moving forward in this painting. It's a big I had a pair of canvas pliers sitting near my palette, and I painted the canvas pliers right into the painting. I depicted I made this little moment of representation. I don't want to feel like I am restricted by some rules that I've got. And so, am I a non-representational painter if I sometimes throw a vase or a pair
Mhm.
of uh, a thing into my paintings? Sometimes it doesn't stay. Sometimes it just keeps moving forward. So I think that's what jumps to mind.
Yeah. So not discovering a subject in order where it's going back to what you were saying earlier about your paintings starting with a mark and then each mark leading to the next in this almost, I don't know, would you call it improvisational way?
Yeah, in an intuitive way. I care a lot about these marks. I remember we were talking earlier about college critiques where one particular teacher of mine, Richard Olson, would get obsessed with a drip or get obsessed with a scrape or just a mark. And he would talk for 10 minutes about the impact that particular mark was having on the whole. And so, because I care about marks in that way, um, they drive themselves. And with a lot of dissatisfaction, the beginning of a painting is full of dissatisfaction or full of incompleteness or full of
Mm-hmm.
uh, things that either deserve to be built up or deserve to be erased. And they're a distraction, and
Mm-hmm.
making those is engaging.
So it strikes me. I'm curious about this process, this creative process, which you're just describing. So I can imagine an artist, a painter or a drawer who's really, really good at representing things, who can, render a landscape or a portrait or a still life in this sort of beautiful but also accurate way, right? And that's wonderful. But at some point, I think for you, like that tipped over into another realm. Um, and I'm wondering about that point. Like, can you remember a point at which you were like, yeah, I can draw this bowl of apples pretty well, but what I really want to do is something else that comes from another place.
There are a couple of things that strike me in this question, and one of them is it ain't a bowl of apples, it's paint, or it ain't a beautiful. And again, even the word accurate, I wouldn't use that word, not to quibble with you, just
No,
to
no,
say, uh, I will actually answer your question. But that it's this funny thing that we have as humans that we can like imbue something with with this idea that it's accurate, and it's actually on a floppy little piece of paper, and like if you just pull it down and you look at the real landscape as this giant thing in front of you, it's just so different in a real sense. Um, but to your question, we worked a fair amount on figurative painting in college. So we'd have a model.
Mm-hmm.
It would sometimes be the 2 or 3 hour class, and you'd have the model for the 2 or 3 hours. And they got breaks, but that was a day worth of art school, and um, confronting the flesh, if you will, with this paint. You've got light is affecting the flesh, and light. If you add all the light together, it turns white. But if you add all the pigments together, they turn dark brown or black. It's just fundamentally a different thing. So converting, if you will, from the what's going into your eye holes compared to what's coming out. What's coming out is pigment. What's coming out is so different um, that I think I got engaged with the paint because of figurative painting.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, I mean, maybe kind of what you're saying is whether it's a bowl of apples or a drawing, charcoal drawing of a figure of a model, um, by the time it's on the paper or the canvas, it's already an abstraction.
Yes, very much so. And we all know that. We all we all know that.
Mm-hmm.
We A hungry person is less hungry because of the bowl of apples or whatever that they've painted. Um, there's a little game one can play in art school or anywhere else where you get the sort of bag of apples and you give every person in the class one of the apples, and they really have to draw it and they have to like study it a little and they work on it all day or whatever, and at the end you put them all back, and then you ask the group to go grab their apple, um, and they all can, um, because they've been with it long enough.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I think that speaks to these little paintings get a personality, or they can be funny. They live on their own.
Mm-hmm. So another sort of idea that you threw at me before in your notes was, and I think you mentioned this teacher Richard Olson. I think this comes from him maybe, and it's sort of a military metaphor. And the quotation you sent was "Get in and get out. No plan survives contact. No plan survives first contact with the enemy." Um, Talk about that in relation to your paintings.
Yes, thank you for asking. I will say that I don't that I'm a peace freak. I'm not a person who wants to glorify the actions that a military has to take, which just involves a bunch of killing, etc.
Mhm.
Uh, but I also don't want to pretend that we live in a world that doesn't involve those things, and it always has. Um, I think that those metaphors served Richard Olson, a combat veteran from Vietnam, as he processed some really tough stuff that he had faced. And he was not a painter before Vietnam, he was a painter afterwards.
Mhm.
And so brought to us, I realized painting in the late 90s, becoming a painter in the late 90s, I had all these teachers that had 30 so years experience who all retired within a couple of years of my graduation. I really feel lucky that I was exposed to those people. And that getting in and getting out, we talked about the palette already. There is a moment where a decisive moment where one must pick up one brush instead of another, and one must sort of grab one puddle of paint instead of another, and one must literally put it onto the fabric of the canvas. And you need a few thoughts to do that, a notion of some kind of something. And this, gosh, the number of times I've said, I'm going to paint that whole thing this. Uh, and 4 seconds into it, all of that has died. And all of the notions that got me to that point are absolutely irrelevant. What is very, very, very relevant is, will I keep like moving this brush, or will it come away again?
Mhm.
Uh, and then get reevaluated. Um, that's what I think about primarily. There's another thought I have, but that's what I think about primarily when I think about some of those military notions. Quickly, I want to tell you, I can't quote this very accurately, so I'm paraphrasing. I don't know who I'm stealing from. Um, but the quote has to do with uh, the person, this is military men back in the day, where uh, the one parent is studying military strategy so that their son can study business, so that their grandson can study art. And um, in my family history, I have some military veterans, and I know that one of them in particular, as a kid, I was exposed to his best friend, John Huxtable. And John Huxtable, um, I think he, I think I glorified something in a particular way once, and I'm going to cry talking about it. He very much regretted that my reaction was to glorify, not to be fairly horrified. The things that he had to do. And so I get to be a painter. I don't know if my kid will get to be a painter. We live in a crazy world. Um, and there is a responsibility, maybe, that I feel to the time that I'm spending doing this, to mean it. I'm going to stop now, but I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And this idea of, I mean, I know it's a military metaphor, but this idea of no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Now that I'm actually listening to you and thinking about it, that can apply to so many things in our lives. Like I started my career as a teacher, and I was in a master's of education program, and you sort of learn all this stuff about child development and how to create a lesson plan. But the first time I stood in front of a class of 35 seventh graders, all that is completely gone. And you're just like, how do I get through this day? What's my next step, and then the one after that, and the one after that. And It can apply to so many different things. And it sounds like that's the kind of painter you are, where you're open to movement and change and improvisation, as we've said a few times now, that leads to something at the end, that you can say, that's mine. I did that.
Hmm. Yeah, that feels, that's, um, I the satisfaction one gets, that I'll speak for myself, I get, um, at the end of when you know it's done, is somewhat fleeting, but is, one of the more pure things I get to experience in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's so clear how invested you are in this project, in this work, intellectually, emotionally, all those ways. It's just crystal clear. So one of the things, and we'll sort of start wrapping up here, that we've touched on a couple of times, and you've mentioned before with me, is that you're interested in sort of parallels between visual art and music. Um, and what are those parallels to you? How does that work in your mind?
I have so many half-formed thoughts about this because I think it's really hard to summarize and to sort of, for me to summarize and for me to really know what I believe. I'll do my best and say there's this sacred space of improvisational music, this time where people are going to often be pretty vulnerable. People are going to take, again, it's time based, and so I'm going to give you some of the time that I have in life, and I'm not going to get it back. And
Mhm.
if it's 20 minutes or whatever it might be, and that space has a parallel. I'm giving time to the painting. You don't necessarily need to give that time. You can look at the whole painting all at once. But if you do give it time, um, you might be rewarded if you like this kind of thing. And so there's a parallel there with the space that's a special sort of space, a unique sort of space. Within that space, musically, there are uh, sounds that are high pitched and sounds that are low pitched and sounds that are brief and sounds that are have more duration, and the quality of not just notes but how those notes sound. The same note coming from a piano is fundamentally a percussive note, and when it comes from a saxophone, it's a piece of woodwind vibrating reeds in the mouth, etc. There's an embouchure of the shape of the lips and mouth, and so forth. And so these things are all going to influence, um, how a musician takes up that space or where within that space they're going to be. And I think there are parallels with the what goes where, if you will, of painting. What is what, but where does it go? Does it go in the top left? Does it go in the middle? Does it sort of, is it big or small, etc.? And one can sort of hone in on some of those qualities. So I just feel that there are these parallels. Improvisers sometimes play solo and other times are working together. And I do feel like I'm a collaborator with my materials. I don't think I'm playing solo. And I clearly am, but it doesn't feel that way. Um,
This just vibrates with me so much because one of the things I love about live music is, especially if it's the kind of music you're talking about, is it's a moment that you're sharing with, musicians and maybe an audience that's never going to happen again in exactly the same way. It's a particular time, a time and space that will never repeat. And that's just kind of rare, more and more rare, I think, today, where things are sort of, you're fed certain things that repeat all the time, whether it's through, the algorithm online or whatever. But if you're in a space where there's music happening and it's not just the repetition of a melody and a lyric, but it's an interpretation of a piece of music that in exactly the same way will never occur again. And you were there, you were part of it, you were part of that interaction. And it feels like the way you're describing your painting is similar, that each time it's a new experience that you're feeling, your interaction with the materials and with the colors and with the thickness of the paint or the tools you're using to put it on, never going to happen in the same way again. And that's just thrilling to me.
It's thrilling to me. It's so funny that sometimes Gosha has asked me sort of um, about an old piece and sort of wonders if I'm working that way now. And it's sort of hilarious, the idea that I could ever make one of my own paintings again.
Right.
I I would have, it's such a, if I were a teacher, I might assign that task just so my students could fail and learn something. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I know for myself that I would absolutely fail. It would be a glorious failure, but it would never, as you say, those are moments that are unique moments, and they pass.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's such a thrill, such a privilege to be able to talk about those things and make those connections about art. And having the freedom to paint in that way must be sort of, I don't know. It feels to me like that must be a real privilege.
Can I just observe that all of the other paintings that have been made through human history were also made in the moment? There
Hmm.
was plan or notions of various kinds, but ultimately they all were, there was a moment of improvisation as a person approached the making.
Yeah, yeah.
And when you think about that human history, we've been painting as human beings. I speak in that sense when I say we. Humans have been painting in caves and sort of like for dozens of thousands of years. It's really not, there's not a point where we are humans, Homo sapiens, where we weren't known to paint.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not saying I care about that in, I don't, I don't want to make the wrong point when I'm bringing that up, but painting is really special. Painting is really human. It's connected. It connects us. I feel connected to it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Jeffrey, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope you did too. And so people can find you. You're online. Your paintings are there. And remind us who's your representation.
Alma Gallery Chicago is Instagram and in Bridgeport. They're right next to Mars Brewing, 3636 South Iron Street in
Hmm.
Chicago. Um, they have parking. They have a 1,000 square feet worth of art run by Gosha Korsakowski and a really great crew of people that help her. Um, and they can get in touch pretty easily by finding Alma online or I think their website is almagallery.com.
Okay. So thank you so much for sharing your passion with us, Jeffrey, and for letting us sort of dive into your process as an artist.
It's been a pleasure, Tim. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it as well.
Thanks, Jeffrey. What I Really Want to Talk About is produced and recorded in the studios of Berea College News and Radio in Berea, Kentucky. You can learn more about this podcast and listen to all of the previous episodes at whatIreallywantotalkabout.com. My contact information is on the website, so please get in touch with me if there's something that you really want to talk about. I'm Tim Monroe. Thanks for listening.